Hey there. Welcome to the technically challenged Falstaff Books book birthday burning bash. Hey, look, if I can't make the tech work, at least I can be alliterative as all get out, right?
Very Shakespeare.
I I'm John Hartness. I'm the founder and publisher of Falstaff Books, and my guest tonight, my friend, my running buddy, my drinking buddy, my author, my man with better hair than me now. Please welcome AJ Hartley, the author of
Yay.
our newest release, Burning Shakespeare. And I got to tell you, man, these hardcovers look really good.
Mm.
I'm pretty happy with them.
I'm taking your word for it. I haven't actually held one yet. So
I know that I'm kind of rubbing that in because, well, I'm a dick. So how you been?
good,
It's been
man.
a minute.
It
I
has.
mean,
It has.
last time I think we were together, I had your hair and you had hair this length.
It's certainly been a while. I mean,
Dragon Con, I
Dragon
guess.
Con,
So
maybe, yeah. Last
yeah,
September or whenever that was, late August, September.
God, that's 6 months or
Yeah.
more
More.
almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've broken a dozen bones since then.
Well, that's true. No, I have seen you since then.
Where were we?
I can't remember.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, neither of us are as young as we used to be.
indeed.
So Burning Shakespeare
Mm.
has been described as Pratchett-esque. If Neil Gaiman and Douglas Adams had a love child in iambic pentameter, it's been compared to all of these really smart writers that I don't know, as well as those guys who I at least know who they are. Um, I wonder if you weren't British, if it would get the Douglas Adams comparisons.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think to me, it's a very British book. There's a particular kind of tradition of a narrative voice, right, in comedy that I think we think of Pratchett and Douglas Adams, but I think it goes back further. I think it goes through Evelyn Waugh and P.G. Wodehouse. I think there's a long tradition of that slightly sort of self-deprecating, snarky, playful, direct reader address kind of thing, which I think some Americans are less familiar with and a little confused by sometimes.
But it's also something that is done successfully in comedic theater in America. Neil Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs
Mhm.
leaps to mind with that kind of breaking of the fourth wall
Yep.
thing. You know, it's not often in my life as a genre fiction writer and publisher that I get two P.G. Wodehouse mentions from two different people in one day.
Oh, really?
But
Get another one?
this, I got another one. Lucy Blue was talking with me about the edits on her next Stella Hart cozy romantic mystery, and she was talking about it being inspired by some of the works of Wodehouse.
Yeah.
And I just, nodded and smiled like I had any idea what she was talking about.
Oh man, I grew up with that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of PG Wodehouse in rural South Carolina.
But you get the Jeeves and Wooster, the British, the Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry TV version of
Yeah.
PBS.
Oh yeah, and I read a ton of Douglas Adams.
Mm.
I've read a bit of Pratchett, not nearly. I don't try to match, you and Emily Leverett on Pratchett trivia, but
I know my Pratchett.
yeah, she and I were talking last weekend, and some of the things that she really enjoyed editing this book were some of the deep cuts on Shakespeare that you put in there. And I know there was one that I had questioned you about in layout because I didn't do the editorial, but there was something in layout that I was like, is this spelled right? Is this a thing? You're like, yep, that's a thing. Said, okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of little in jokes for Shakespeare fans along the way. Yeah.
So I'm probably, I don't know, to use a D&D reference, because although you can't really see it from my mic and pop shield, I've got my D&D t-shirt on today. For me, I'm probably like, I don't know, maybe a third, fourth level Shakespeare nerd. I'd say well, 20 is about the max. I'm going to call you 17
Oh, at least.
level 17, 18 Shakespeare nerd. Since we are going to the Shakespeare Association of America conference next week, they ain't ready for this. But tell us a little bit about the book. What's the book about, other than me telling people it's time travel, trying to go back and fulfill the dreams of every single high school English student ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of ensemble cast, to use a theatrical metaphor. And one of the characters who sets the story in motion is called Robert Bliss, and he's a university administrator who hates Shakespeare and thinks that universities should be reduced to basically their business school and their football team. So he sells his soul to the devil, or a devil, in order to go back in time and wipe Shakespeare from history. So that's where the story starts. And then, because it's traditional for angels and devils to try to thwart each other, there's a lot of thwarting going on in angelic circles, I believe. So then an angel gathers a team of recently dead 21st century humans to basically put right whatever the demonic team is screwing up. And there are rules, right, within the story that the angels and devils can't do certain things. They can facilitate, the magic of time travel, but they can't actually involve themselves in human activity. So the angel needs these three people who she sends back to try and stop whatever the devils are doing. And of course, the humans are not actually convinced that it's worth doing. That for various reasons, they think the present might be better off without Shakespeare in it. But if they are successful, then they get their lives back. So,
So if they win, they come back from the dead.
well, they come. I mean, it's a time travel book, so they come back fractionally before they are mowed down by a passing train, and are able to go next door for a croissant and a cup of coffee instead.
I would prefer a croissant and a cup of coffee to being mowed down by a train.
Yeah.
Depending on who made the coffee. I mean, if we're talking like hospital coffee, train might be better.
Indeed. Yeah.
Now this is a time travel book, and it's almost like there was time travel magic involved in the publication of the book.
And
when did you start working on this one?
I started working on this. I think I started working on it when I was in grad school. Certainly within the first year or so out of grad school. So 96, 97, thereabouts. Which is why.
So the manuscript can drink in bars legally in the US.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah. Which is sort of terrifying. And it got massively rewritten many times. But
of course,
usually those rewrites were sort of tinkerings and fixings and adjustments and stuff. And then in the most recent incarnation, I took a sort of wrecking ball to it and identified the stuff that I thought I liked, the stuff that I thought still mattered, the stuff that I thought worked, and completely restructured the story, changed the characters changed, key rules about the way the story was functioning, and even sort of the way that the outcome played out. So, yeah, there was a lot of radical rethinking. And some of that is just, me as a writer thinking some of the things that I was pleased with weren't as good as I thought they were.
And time travel's hard. So AJ from 25 years ago might just not have been ready to write a really good time travel book.
Yeah, I think actually, I think part of the thing, it was one of the reasons that I wrestled with this book, was because I'm a Shakespeare professor. Um, and so, there's a tendency to want to teach, and one of the things that I was struggling with, every time I would get excited about the new version of the book, and I would let it sit for a little while, and then I would come back and I would find myself getting irritated or bored because I felt like the story was getting upstaged by the academic, the impulse to sort of instruct and to say interesting and clever things about Shakespeare. So God
So,
forbid we should do that.
well, by this point in your career, you've probably said all of the interesting and fun things about Shakespeare. So your students aren't watching this, I hope, because, well, we want them to keep coming to class for at least another
But I think
couple of
also
months.
the thing is, when you're dealing with Shakespeare for 25 years, which is about as long as I've been teaching it, I mean, a little more if you think about the classes I taught in grad school. Shakespeare's changed a lot in the last 30 years, because we have changed a lot, and the things that we care about.
Right.
And so, academia and the things that it's interested in, and the kind of questions that we have about Shakespeare, I mean, this is what part of what makes Shakespeare Shakespeare, right? Is that we are constantly using him as a reflection of ourselves. And that means that he's constantly changing, not because we're discovering that the text itself is not what we thought it was, though sometimes that's true too, but because, the articles, the books, the academic studies that are being done could not have been done 25, 50, 100 years ago, And
It's almost like you're holding a mirror up to nature and nature changes.
exactly, yeah. I think that's right. And, I mean, it's like, sometimes a student will come in with some edition which is like 19th century. It's not that the book is not 19th century, but the actual text is a 19th century text because they're cheap, and Barnes and Noble slap a new cover on it or whatever, right? And they come in with these things, and then you look at the footnotes, it's like, these are not speaking to us. These are speaking to Victorian people from like 100+ years ago. And I don't even understand the footnotes. I don't understand what they think I should be interested in. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think those kind of little markers are really interesting. I mean, I'm working on Julius Caesar at the moment for the Arden series, and which means going back through every text of that play that has ever been printed and looking through all their footnotes and so on. And it's fascinating that the things that they take for granted about their values and which characters are noble and which ones aren't and all that kind of stuff is like completely alien. It's like reading something from a foreign country, which of course it is, because that's what the past is. So, this is a long-winded way of saying, yeah, Shakespeare has changed a lot in the last 30 years. That's one of the reasons the book had to keep getting rewritten. Because if I'd printed, if we had published, one of those early drafts, it would have felt like a historical artifact. It would have felt like something we dug up, So,
and that's not what we do.
No, it's not.
That's not our business model.
No.
It is fascinating to me that where was this in the number of books that you've written? was did you what was the one you started with and buried?
A book that has never been published was the first thing I wrote, called A
I've
Grain.
got I've got, you know, a couple of your trunk novels on the table behind me, bud.
Yeah. Act of Will and Willpower were, I think, the second. You know what, though? I'm trying to think. I have a feeling that I might have written the first draft of Burning Shakespeare before I wrote Willpower. I might have
Hmm,
written it between them. Um,
okay.
it was certainly around then. And then, Act of Will and Willpower came out with Tor like maybe 20 years after I wrote the first drafts. Um, and they didn't change that much. This one obviously has been massively rethought.
Well,
Yeah.
Act of Will and Willpower are fantasy novels in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
There are things that would have changed naturally in the way we speak and the way characters speak, but you didn't have to, change things about how the world behaved.
No, what I had to do was wait for the market to catch up to a notion of fantasy that wasn't all Tolkien knockoff. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
I
Because
absolutely do.
because those books have that sort of snarky, quite even though it's a historical epic fantasy kind of world, they have a sort of fairly contemporary kind of feel. And at the time,
Absolutely.
nobody was doing that. Yeah,
No, and it took a long time for that to get into high fantasy,
yeah,
um, because urban fantasy started off living there, but it took a long time to cross over into high or epic fantasy, and now it's all over the place.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, so let's talk a little bit about how the Shakespeare professor, how you going to be how you think we're going to do walking into the collection of Shakespeare academics in the country with a googly-eyed Shakespeare book.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some people will really like it. I mean, some people being some academics and scholars, and of course there'll be a lot of people there who know me as an academic.
Mhm.
So that will buy me some credibility, as will the blurbs, that are all from other, big name academics. So that endorsement, I think, will carry some weight. But some of them will hate it. Some of them will hate the
Sure.
very idea of it, which I am okay with. I always think, let me go out on a limb and say, I suspect that those people would have hated Shakespeare in his own day. You know what I mean?
Well,
Maybe that's not fair, but
no, I think it's pretty fair because we are brought up, you and I, despite the literal ocean between us, have fairly similar upbringings. Working class parents, we grew up in working class households. So we were brought up that Shakespeare is kind of this holy thing up on a hill. It's not till much later that we learn how many dick jokes are in there.
yeah, yeah,
And there's a lot.
indeed.
That should not be the hand motion I use for
I was
that.
going to say, yes, you might want to rethink that.
Might want to work on that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think.
all my signage for the booth, for you, we're going to set up different signing times when you've got availability during the conference. All my signage for that conference will say Andrew Hartley's new release.
Okay.
because
Okay.
because that's what you publish academically as.
Yeah.
And when you're in the program for this event, it's as Dr. Andrew Hartley.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not AJ, my long-haired drinking buddy, but
Indeed. Well, this is, and welcome to my life, right? This is the sort of curious tightrope that I walk between these fairly different cultural positions.
well, that's always the funny part to everyone when we come to your Christmas party because half the house is the Andrew half and half the house is the AJ half.
Yeah.
And I know them all because
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew most of the faculty at your university from doing lighting design work there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the schizophrenic isn't really the real word, but it's the right word, but it's the one we've got. The schizophrenic nature of your life is pretty interesting to watch from the outside.
And that's before we even get into baby metal and other Japanese rock bands.
Or, that time you ended up mentioned in major news articles alongside alien conspiracy theorists.
This is true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're an interesting dude, buddy.
Unfortunately, it doesn't help me sell books. As we were saying, as I've said many times, I'm an agent's nightmare. The very fact that I write lots of different things and always have done and have lots of different interests means that I don't have a coherent single identity. So even people who follow me for certain things don't tend to cross over into the other areas of my life.
So we're saying that we don't expect every one of your YouTube subscribers who are J-pop fanatics to rush out and buy the googly-eyed Shakespeare book.
Tragically, no. I wish we could, but no. But though, as I said, almost 50% of that audience is in Japan. So their likelihood of buying an English language book with jokes about Shakespeare in it is somewhat slim.
But who knows?
I'm assuming Falstaff hasn't done the Japanese translation just yet.
That's still in the works. Also, I don't have those rights because I don't have the facility to do it yet. I did talk to a guy this weekend about translations, so maybe soon, hopefully. If someone was walking up to the Falstaff books table and you had made the tragic error of sitting down behind the table and having to interact with customers at a convention.
Never good.
What would you tell them?
About the book?
Why should someone pick this book up?
Well, the sort of standard opening gambit is always, what do you like to read? And
yes,
the sort of the adjacent question, I think, for this one is always like, well, it's not a question exactly. I would watch their face when they see the Shakespeare image and name, right? Because for some people, Shakespeare is an immediate hook, right? They're like, oh, Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I'm into, we go to the festival in the park every year and blah, 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 right? And for
some people, it's an immediate spear.
Exactly.
Piercing them right through the heart.
Yes. Fortunately, this book works for both groups.
I can already tell you how I'm going to pitch the book at cons. Same deal. If someone sees Shakespeare and their eyes light up, then I just give it to them and say, it's a googly-eyed Shakespeare book. Give me 20 or 30 bucks, depending on whether they want the paperback or hardcover. But then if they look a little squirrely, I'm like, hey, look, if you've ever sat in an English class in middle school or high school and wanted to go back in time and strangle that guy, this is the book for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you love Shakespeare or you hate Shakespeare, you should definitely want to burn Shakespeare.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, obviously it's a playful book. It's got a lot of sort of hopefully comic elements to it, and it's got that sort of time travel-y, goofy fantasy story to it. But I also think it's a fairly, in its own way, serious examination of what we love and hate about Shakespeare. And if we were presented with that question, is the present better or worse off with Shakespeare in it? How would we answer that question? And I think the book in its own way is actually trying to wrestle with that some, because it's not an easy question.
It's not.
A lot of apart from the boredom factor, right? That some people don't want to read Shakespeare in high school and so on. I get that, but Shakespeare has also been a tool of other kinds of oppression, that we have to take fairly seriously, and so I think it's a real question. Obviously, I'm a Shakespeare professor, so I'm invested in Shakespeare, and but I wanted to take the question seriously and say, I, I can understand why some people would not want to sort of to save the plays, and let's take that seriously and see if we can have a conversation about it.
And I think that, to me, is more than the language and more than the style of the prose. That, to me, rings Pratchett-esque, because he had a way of addressing large societal issues with a comedic spin,
Yeah,
like the whole shoes thing from, what was it, Guards, when he talked about
the
you
the
buy
the
you
boot
buy
theory, the Sam Vimes boot theory of economics, right? Yeah,
which is so true. I
yeah,
mean, the thing that I wear, basically, Falstaff logo t-shirts, pro wrestling t-shirts, or role-playing game t-shirts, and blue jeans I buy off Amazon. But the one thing I spend money on is shoes,
mm, mm,
because, just like Vimes says, if you can't afford good shoes, you're gonna spend 2 or 3 times as much buying crappy shoes all the time.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
and Pratchett did that a lot.
absolutely. And with the later Sam Vimes books, particularly from Feet of Clay and Fifth Elephant, Thud, um, Night Watch, all of those books, have core, really interesting sort of social, racial conflict issues at the heart of them, or issues of gender and sexuality, all sorts of stuff in the works. And I think part of what makes Pratchett great is his ability to do all that stuff with that really light touch, so that you're still reading an adventure, you're still laughing out loud, but all this stuff is going on in the background. That's part of his genius. And if this book can be compared to those kind of things, then I call that a win.
Absolutely. um there's a certain level of win just in giving birth to something that had its origins in a previous century.
Yeah,
This book is older than the century we're in,
yeah,
which is pretty awesome, because going back and reworking it from the ground up is not an easy task to undertake.
no, it's not. And I think it's a good sort of cautionary, not cautionary tale, but it's a good, maybe, I don't know if it's inspiring. It's one of those things where I can't tell whether it's happy or sad, really, that it took
Yeah,
25 years to get out into the world. Because in some ways it's both. But for people who write something and then they come back to it and they look at it and they can't sell it, or it doesn't work for them, it doesn't seem as good as they thought, that's okay. Put it away for a while, and maybe you can come back to it and rethink it, and hopefully it'll take less time than quarter of a century. But I think that there's value to that.
and also then you've got time to write the next book, which you've been doing. This is, what is it, book 24?
Yeah, novel 24.
Novel 24.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to discuss AJ and short stories because, well, it's a pretty short discussion,
It
because
is.
that's not really your thing.
No, but academic books, I mean, as opposed to novels,
Now, speaking of academic books, you talked a little bit about doing the Arden Caesar.
Yeah.
What, to people who aren't neck deep in Shakespeare, what does that mean?
Well, it's a kind of pathology. It's sort of a mental illness of some sort. What does that mean? It means, all Shakespeare's plays you can buy in different editions. Folger and Signet and Cambridge and Oxford and Bedford and God. There are lots. The RSC has a new series, and the most sort of traditionally scholarly is the Arden. It tends to be the thickest. It's the one where you open it. It's got a long introductory section, and then when you get to the text, it's one of those ones where you look at it, you open it up, and it's like half the page or less is the actual play, and the rest is footnotes. And it's the edition which is the most detailed in its glossary, in its glossing of lines, its sort of textual history, all those kind of things. So it's a long. Editing a Shakespeare play for that edition, actually for any edition, but particularly for the Arden, is a long process. I think I'm on year, I'm not sure, 3 or 4 at this point.
Yeah.
I'm just about done with the main text. I still have the introduction and appendixes to write, but I'm hoping that I'll be done with it by the end of the year. And then, as it then has to go through editorial process and so on. So it'll probably be another year before it comes out.
Yeah, I was talking with an author earlier today, and the question of timeline came up, and I said, well, most of the time, 12 to 18 months between signing a contract and release.
Yeah.
And that puts us a little faster than most New York presses, but
Yeah.
definitely a lot slower than I thought we were going to be when I started a press.
Well, I
But
mean,
it takes time.
because you want to produce a good product, right? So it has to go through a lot of different kinds of editorial process, right? You developmental
Absolutely.
edit and copy edit and proofing and all the rest of it. Yeah.
And page proofs, and then there are the questions about layout,
Right. And format,
of which there were several. This was a complicated layout because every chapter was location, time, who's in it,
quotation.
Yeah, damn it.
Yeah. And whenever you're quoting I mean, this is one of the reasons when students insist on getting like free downloads of plays that they're reading on their phone in class, and it never works because, particularly with Shakespeare, the text all gets scrambled, the verse gets messed up. It doesn't work very well. So yeah, so whenever you introduce those kind of elements into a novel as well, that creates layout challenges.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. The software I use makes a good looking book in not a ton of time, but definitely took a couple more minutes than Impervious took to lay out.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, maybe 2.5 times the size of Impervious, which was not a very big book.
No, is it? I want to say, is it really that much longer? I thought Impervious came in at about 52,000 words, something like that. What is Burning Shakespeare? Is it close to 100?
I am calling that up right now because Vellum tells me this in the very beginning of the file. 94.
Okay.
So not quite double.
Yeah.
Because Impervious was right at 50.
Yeah.
Which is why it's in a smaller format.
Yeah. And with this, because of the way the chapters are broken up and the quotations and stuff like that, there's probably a little extra space added to it as well.
Yeah, it that does add a little bit, but it's a good looking book.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quite proud of the way the physical product, because that's part of the process too.
Yeah.
When someone's deciding to buy a book, it's okay. I've held it in my hand. I open it up.
I'm really interested to see how people respond just to the sort of the physical look of the book, because the cover is kind of in your face, goofy, deliberate. I mean, when you're talking about how a Shakespeare,
it is when you're close.
I don't know.
It's got that goofy look when you're close, but if you're when you're across a room from it, that looks just like a picture of Shakespeare.
I know. I was
And,
actually just thinking that because when I can't see it up close from here, it does look like a picture of Shakespeare. Yeah.
and then when we look behind you, we see that's just creepy, man. You moving your head and a new googly eye popping out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, dude,
Yep.
that's wrong. So that's what we've got for tonight. We've been rolling for about as long as I think people are going to pay attention to us. So people can pick up the book, ebook on Amazon, paperback. You can order it anywhere books are sold. Hardcover's the same. You can get it anywhere books are sold. You may have to ask your bookstore to order it in, or you can go to the Falstaff Books website, and in a couple of weeks, you'll be able to order signed inventory off of our website because, well, I'm going to have you chained to a signing table most of a weekend. So you're going to sign it all anyway.
Yeah. And we have a bunch of conventions coming up. Apart from the Shakespeare Association conference in Jacksonville, there's also Jordan Con in Atlanta, and then Atomicon in Charleston,
Atomicon in May, Con Carolinas in
Con
June.
Carolinas in Charlotte, and then I think nothing until Dragon Con.
But if you would like to pick those up, you can also find Falstaff Books at RavenCon the weekend after Jordan Con. We'll be at Con Carolinas. We'll be at Heroes Con 2 weeks after Con Carolinas. Then we'll be at Liberty Con the week after that. Then we'll be at Congregate 2 weeks after that.
Wow.
Then we'll be at Authors and Drag. Then we'll be at Galaxy Con in Raleigh the last weekend in July, and then Authors of Dragons Con back in Charlotte in August.
So even when I'm not
Dragon
there,
Con.
right? So even when I'm not there, I can sign stock for you to sell at those conventions as well.
Absolutely, because everything we take to Florida, we're of course going to sell at the con.
Yeah.
And we're going to have, and we'll have order forms. So for those of you watching, we're sorry that we're not Baby Metal. I'm sorry that I'm not Tom DeLonge. But get out there and pick up Burning Shakespeare because it is in English as opposed to Baby Metal. And it's funnier than Tom DeLonge. So
Tom's pretty funny.
You shut up. I'm working here. So AJ, any last bits of advice or commentary for our audience?
No,
hair care tips.
I just hope people like it. You know, that this was a labor of love, and you know, and now it's out in the world. I really hope it finds an audience and that people get a kick out of it. And when you do get it, review it. You know, post reviews. You know, feel free to drop me a line through my website or something, ajhartley.net. It will be eligible for award nominations and things.
That's right. So when you buy it and when you love it, you should then go nominate it for things like the Dragon Award, which anyone can nominate books for. Or you can buy a ticket to Worldcon in Chicago. If you don't want to hang with us in Atlanta Labor Day weekend, you can go to Chicago. And if you nominate it for a Hugo and it wins, we'll say thank you.
Indeed, we will. Yes, we will.
Crisp high five.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend. It's always good spending time with you. And for those of you out there watching, peace.
Cheers. Thank you.